and welcome back to the Physiology of Sing and Sing and Sing out. Hi. I like to do these videos more in a row because then I have a better memory for where I left off, which is why the one I did yesterday ended up getting kind of repeated in the last video. So, I'm sorry if you wasted your time watching both. Anyway, so let's get real here about sound waves. Okay, so these are terms that I remember learning in my vocal pedagogy courses, but then I had to learn into more detail as I actually started studying a bit more acoustics in speech pathology, and especially research and such. So, those terms being complex wave, simple sound wave, complex periodic, and complex aperiodic. Does that sound familiar to anyone? I don't know. And some people might recognize those terms, some people might not. But I have a visual. I had to think of like something I have at home that I could use as a visual to try to explain what these things are. So a simple sine wave is something like a simple sound wave is graphically shown by a sine wave. If you can like dig into the recesses of your brain in some math class at some point, you probably saw like a graph with like just a wave going up and down, up and down, up and down, okay? Simple sine wave, okay? Super exciting, right? And it's shown that way because, you know, like I said before, the air molecules, you know, they bump up and get all up in their neighbors' spaces, they compress, and then they also rarefact, right? They back away from the neighbors like, whoa, bud, sorry, I didn't mean to get up all in your space, before they finally kind of find their nice little happy equilibrium where they're hanging out without touching anybody, okay? And so, you know, it's graphed that way, essentially. You have, through time, you have points of compression and points of rarefaction and points of compression, right? They're all up in each other's space, and then they're way far away from each other, and then they're all up in each other's space, right? And throughout time, it's like different rows of air molecules are being impacted, and that gives you the sound wave traveling in time, which is what you see on that graph. Okay, super exciting. I don't know, that's not actually that exciting to a singer. So the main thing for singers, I think, to remember is that simple sine waves are where people start talking about it, because that's where like the math and all that stuff, that's like baseline basic 101, okay, sound wave stuff. But the main thing about sine waves is, I think, for singers, is they don't actually really exist in nature. Simple sound waves are not things that you're going to produce with your voice. They just really aren't. You're not going to produce like a single note, okay? They don't tend to exist in nature because nature tends to be a lot more complex, right? And like special. But it's true, actually. There's really not examples of simple sine waves in nature. They tend to be electronically created, okay? If you're ever curious as to what a simple sine wave sounds like, if you remember being a kid in school where they put headphones on you to test your hearing, right? And you heard like little boop, boop, and you had to like raise your hand when you hear the beep. Those typically are sine waves. They're simple sounds. Simple sound, like just the single pitch that they're trying to get to you, because they're actually trying to test if your ear has a response to that particular. So they'll test like 1,000 hertz and 2,000 hertz and stuff like that. But that's what they sound like, and it's definitely weird. It's not something you normally hear, right? So let's just dive into complex, shall we? Because that's what we're actually talking about. We're talking about complex sound, okay? Because we're complex people, and we create complex sound. I don't know. Right, so complex. Okay, so here's my analogy. So let me give you the academic definitions first. So hold on to your hats. Here they are. Oh my gosh. So a complex periodic sound is a sound where you end up with a fundamental, okay, fundamental wave, and its harmonics. Harmonics are integer multiples of the fundamental. Is that exciting? It's pretty elegant, actually, little definition. I actually like it. But all that means for you as a singer is, what to remember about that is a regular pattern. that has a very clear, organized pattern of how the sound waves exist in nature, okay? They are integer, like whole numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, those kind of integers, multiples of the fundamental. So you got 200 hertz. You want to know what that first harmonic is? You go, okay, 200 times 2. Okay, so 400 hertz. 200 times 3, 600 hertz. So then you end up with your harmonic series based off of just taking integer multiples. Super elegant, super nice, right? Now, complex aperiodic means it's still sine waves. Everything's made up of those simple sine waves, but there's no pattern to it. They're just like all kinds of up in each other's business. Okay, there's no integer multiples of the fundamental. There's just like a bunch of sine waves slammed together and moving in space. And just, it's chaos, people. It's chaos. It's sound anarchy. That's what noise is. Anarchy! Okay, I don't know. But it's true. And we create noise when we speak, actually. We use noise. We use turbulence. Air turbulence tends to create noise in terms of sound waves. Complex aperiodic. And we use it when we do S's. I'm not using my voice. I'm just using air turbulence to create some sine waves that are not integer multiples. They're just noise, okay? S's, SH's, you know, and you can also have a combo. You can have a Z, which is a combo of the complex periodic from the vocal folds and that noise from the S, essentially. Okay, you could end up with that too. So it's not so much that singers don't need to know this, it just, you need to know that like complex aperiodic, you can have some breathiness coming through your voice too, honestly, that's still complex aperiodic. So if you're trying to do like a Marilyn Monroe impression or something, or you're just trying to do a really sexy soft voice, like, hey, how's it going, guys? What's up? Okay, so sexy. I'm gonna turn on my sexy face. Hi. How's it going? Okay, that is me putting a little more breathiness, okay? I'm probably not at, chances are good, my vocal folds aren't adducted as much, and I've got a lot of breath going through, a lot of air turbulence going through my vocal folds. There's some vibration, because I'm not whispering, I'm still creating some voicing, it's just very soft voicing, and there's a lot of air coming through that makes it sound softer to you, but it tends to sound softer because the noise, it's passing through a small opening, so the sound waves created from that, the aperiodic sine waves that are created, are higher frequency, and because resonance still holds, it's still a thing, and that will dampen out some of those higher harmonics, actually. Yeah, the noise gets all up in those harmonics biz and are just like shh, essentially, I guess. Okay. So here's my visual to help you kind of imagine, wrap your head around what the heck I've just been talking about. Okay? You ready for it? Because it's knitting. I knit. And that's what made me think about it. So, okay, so in this analogy, sine wave is going to be strand O yarn. Ha ha! So, boom, yarn equals sine wave. Okay? This is just a sine wave, okay? Now, if you end up with complex periodic, I had to find some really, really tangled yarn, essentially. So think of complex aperiodic as being like a giant tangle, okay? So it's the yarn, oh gosh, I have another one in there. But it's like, you take those sine waves and you tangle them all up together, essentially, and you end up with something that it's kind of chaotic. Like, you can't find a pattern in that, right? And your auditory system is going to hear that and send a signal to your brain that your brain is going to perceive as noise. You would call it noise. Just noise. Okay? Noise. All right. Whereas complex periodic sounds, you can think of it as actual, like a knit scarf or something. I found a scarf that I made like a little while ago. This has lace in it. It's a lace knit. See that? So you can have different types of sound sources. You can have different types of complex periodic sounds, just like you can have different types of knitting. You can have lacy knit. You can have things with cables in them. You can have, this is something I'm making right now, so we'll see if you can see these things because my needle is very well stuffed. But these are going to be a pair of ballet shorts. I recently got into an adult ballet class and I'm loving it, so I decided to make myself some shorts with some yarn that I had not been using. So you can make like rib stitches like this, see? You know, it's a different pattern. I got different patterns up here, right? The way the stitches end up looking, okay? Because knitting essentially at the end of the day is really long form weaving, essentially. Like you're just making loops on loops on loops, knitting and crocheting both. It's just loops on loops on loops. It's like a weaving machine, but only 2 little needles, essentially, and so it's just, you know, really long weaving. So you're creating fabric out of this stuff, knit fabric, but you can make all sorts of different patterns, right? So just like you can have different types of complex periodic waves, you can have ones that just have odd integer multiples. You can have ones that just have even integer multiples. You can have all kinds of stuff. So different types of, whoa, sorry, got yarn. Yarn gets everywhere. It's crazy. But just remember, your aperiodic sound waves is kind of like if your cat got a hold of your yarn. I don't have a cat. This is literally just leftover yarn. But, you know, if they got a hold of it and they made a giant mess out of the whole darn thing, that's your noise. There's your complex aperiodic, okay? Still made up of yarn, right? It's still made up of sine waves because our yarn is sine waves, right? They're just not in any sort of pattern. It's not any recognizable, organized pattern that your brain listens to and hears as, yeah, something you would say has like a pitch, right? As a musician, you would say it has a pitch. Musicians can say noise has pitch, which is true because you can have sort of higher sounding noise, right? Like a s sounds a little higher than a sh, right? But that's just based off of the resonance of the space that that air turbulence is going through. So more turbulence in a larger space is going to sound like lower noise because you're going to have longer wavelengths of sine waves, which are lower pitches, being actually boosted by the resonance of that cavity, of that air cavity. And so you hear that as lower. So, I know, it's kind of crazy. Okay, so that is my visual for you of what we're talking about. We're talking about sound source. We're talking about either aperiodic or periodic, and if you're talking about voice, you're talking about complex sound. You're not talking about simple sound. It's just that it's made up of sine waves. Sine waves are the building blocks, essentially, of your complex sound, regardless of whether it's aperiodic or periodic, okay? So there's that. So if you're ever looking into any research or anything, just keep that in mind. If they're talking about sound, they're talking about any kind of sound that's made up of sine waves, but they could be talking about noise. What your brain hears is noise, which is aperiodic. They could be talking about periodic, which your brain hears is something not noise, essentially. Something with some kind of, you know, actual like note or pitch. It's kind of, you know, it's kind of consonant, essentially, as a musician, right? Or they could be talking about a combination of both. They could be talking about noise with like an aperiodic with a periodic sound, combo, a twofer, like a zzz sound, or, you know, if you're being really breathy with your voice, you could be like you're singing off your voice, as some people call it, when you're just kind of, yeah, 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 and you're purposely blowing a lot of air through, which is a technique that people who use mic technique, that's a certain vocal color that people who use mic technique is completely valid. So for people who sing with mics, for newer Broadway shows, for pop singers, for rock singers, R&B, it's totally valid to do that. Classical singers, that is a completely valid part of their technique because it's a different color in the microphone. It creates a completely different sound. And when you're dealing with microphones, you don't have as much of a control over how loud you sound. You have a lot more control over the color of your voice, like the quality. Like, does it sound like this? Or does it sound like this? You know, yeah, there's a different loudness there. But really, if I had good sound guys, you know, and a really quality mic, right, you'll hear the difference. But really, it's the actual sound coming through out of the speaker that you perceive as what's so different about it. So classical singers have to rely a lot more on, total side note, they have to rely a lot more on crescendo, decrescendo, on fine control over their dynamics in addition to their vocal colors because they don't have microphones. So they can use dynamics as a very effective expressive tool, whereas a lot of belters, for people who use mics, if you try to use dynamics as your primary expressive tool, you're not going to get very far. There's not going to be a lot of contrast. It's not going to be as interesting. There you go. So anyway, total side note. It's legitimate to sing off the voice if you're somebody who needs to use mics, if that's part of your singing style. But off the voice is essentially you're going to have some noise in there. You're going to have some breathiness, which is noise, which is air just coming through and not being chopped up into a nice patterned, complex periodic sound. So I'm going to barrel right through here and go straight into formants. You ready for it? Oh, snap! And then I'm going to expand more on formants. But since I use knitting as my example for our sound source, our sound waves that we're dealing with, the filter, the vocal tract above your voice, or any air column, so like the body of the violin, the body of the cello, the trumpet itself, other than the lips that are vibrating on that trumpet, these are all the air columns. These are all filters that shape the sound, okay? The reason a trumpet sounds different from a euphonium, the reason a tuba sounds different, okay? The reason, an oboe sounds different from like a clarinet. You have a different sound source, yes, because you have a single reed, a double reed, or just lip vibration, but you also have different shapes of your instruments, right? And so your vocal tract changes shape a lot, and that's what makes us so unique. We're very malleable. We're a very malleable instrument. That's how we create our speech. But formants are created. This is the textbook definition of formants. They are peaks of energy in the harmonic spectrum. Peaks of energy in the harmonic spectrum. That's what a formant is. So let's unpack that, shall we? So you got your harmonics, you got your complex periodic wave, and it has, a fundamental frequency, and it has integer multiples that are harmonics coming off that sound source, okay? And then those sound source goes through a filter. Like it goes through an air column that has its own size and shape, which means it has its own resonance, okay? Because everything has resonance, okay? Anything that has mass has resonance, all right? And actually, yeah, light can resonate as well, so. And light doesn't have mass. Okay, but anyway, resonance rules the world, people. So you have that air, the air molecules in that filter have resonance as well. So what this means is different standing waves will be created, the certain harmonics will be strengthened and certain harmonics will be dampened, okay? Some harmonics are going to get a little boost, they're going to sum together and be like, we are the most awesome harmonics, wah! Okay? And then you're going to have another group of harmonics, you're like, okay, fine, we'll just kind of shut up, shh. And they still are there, they still exist, but their energy is really dampened. They're kind of, they're kind of shushed. The filter's just like, shush yourselves, you harmonics that don't resonate with me right now. Okay. So formants, using my knitting analogy, here's how you can kind of think of formants. It's like if you take the same sweater, if you knit a piece of clothing, you knit a sweater, and you put the same sweater on different people's bodies, different heights, different sizes, okay? And you think about how different that sweater is going to look on different bodies. That's the effect the filter has on that sound source. So if the sweater is the source of the sound, of the complex periodic wave we're talking about, then when you put it on like somebody who's really curvy, right, your eye is going to be drawn to certain areas of the sweater, maybe certain knits, like the cable knit will look really different. Let's say it's a cable knit sweater. It's like one of those nice like white cable knit sweaters that's all warm and cozy, okay? And one person puts it on and their curves really show off a certain area of the sweater. Another person puts it on and the sweater comes down to like their navel. Another tiny person puts it on, a little kid or something, and it comes down to their knees. It's more like a dress than a sweater. For some people, it's like the shoulders might be kind of tight. On other people's shoulders might be really loose. Okay, right? So their bodies are shaping that sweater very differently. And it's making the same source, the same sweater, look really different based off of the filter being their body. Their body just makes it look different. Right? So there's my analogy, okay? So formants are essentially like You take that source, that same source, and you pump it through a different filter, and you might get a very different sound. So what that means for singers, the thing about the filter for us is it's the vocal tract, and our vocal tract, like I said, is really malleable. It changes shape a lot using our tongue, using our pharynx, using our soft palate. We can change the length using our lips, using our jaw. We can change the size of it, the shape, mainly the length of it that affects it as a whole. We can change where we're contracting certain areas of space that brings out certain formants. And when we're talking, we're doing this pretty much continuously in time. Our vocal tract is pretty much always in motion while we're talking. And in singing, it's in motion too. It's just a little, it's like a slow motion usually. Singing is a little slower than speech typically. I mean, I'm not talking about patter songs, okay? Those guys can be up to speech level. You know, so our vocal tract can always be shifting and moving. And so that, the difference we create in those shapes is what gives us the sound of speech. It's what makes us tell what's an E versus what's an ooh. It makes you know the words I'm saying versus the words I'm not saying, you know. So ooey, 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 ooh. You heard me do different vowels, right? And move through those vowels from one to the next continuously. So that's what makes formants kind of complex when you're talking about singing. But the main thing I want to talk about with vocal tract in relation to formants is, let's talk about next time, just for sake of time. Next video, I'm going to get into the formant numbers that people talk about, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay? And just sort of theoretically what those numbers tend to be associated with and what that means for a singer. Because there are certain formants, particularly the higher up you go, like the singer's formant, right? You can create that as a more stable formant throughout. Whenever you're voicing, you can have that a pretty nice, strong peak of energy in your sound. Whereas the formants that are creating your vowels are lower, and they just need to be a little, you know, you need a certain clarity to them, right? Like they have to be there in order for a person to hear you singing the right vowel. So, details. But okay. And then what my plan is, we're going to talk about these formant business, and then I'm actually going to dive into more of like the anatomy and physiology of the pharynx and the vocal tract and what like in the oral cavity and all that stuff. Because I think it's important for me, I think of the acoustics first, because when I'm talking about anatomical landmarks, especially when I'm thinking about it with my students and when I'm working on it myself, I like to consider where certain sound qualities, where a coach, what are they listening to, and where does it probably associate with what might be going on in my mouth or in my throat. And that just helps me as a singer, and it helps me as a teacher troubleshoot in terms of if diction is a little muddy, or if the ring or the ping, the singer's formant, has kind of disappeared, like what probably happened. So then I have a better idea of how to kind of work around that and try to change that coordination a bit. And this is where technique gets really weird and really hard, but it's a really important, I think, thing to have conceptually, just because it tends to be something that gets really confusing. I think the vocal tract and resonance and formants is really where singing pedagogy gets very confusing for a lot of singers, and also where a lot of concepts tend to get a little muddied. So I want to spend some time on it. Alright, so I'll see you in the next video, and you guys have a good day. Bye!